So recently I've been taking a deep dive into some of the maths going on behind the scenes in Dead by Daylight, because the game doesn't handle numeric changes in the way you might think. I'm not just saying that for a good hook either. For starters, positive and negative modifiers are handled completely differently from each other, which means some things actually turn out to be much less effective than you'd expect, others might be more in line with what you'd think, and some will leave your jaw on the floor with how truly ridiculous they end up being, whether it's ridiculously good or ridiculously bad. And in the case of generator regression, it's both. It's no secret that certain gen regression perks have been absolutely pivotal in the outcome of most matches over the years. Of course, even non-DBD players will be familiar with Ruin and how long of a run that perk had, but in modern day, Pain Resonance is all the rage. Generator slowdown has been core to killer builds since the release of the Hag in 2016. After my previous video talking about the gen kicking meta and the effects that Overbrine had on the game, I got curious as to how viable the build would be nowadays. Eruption is easy to work out since it's just a flat 10% insta-regression upon proccing it, but Call of Brine will need a bit of maths to work out. After its nerf, it went from regressing gens at 200% of the normal speed to 125% of the normal speed, which means, in order to tell how much of a difference Brine makes, we need to get the base regression times. So, each generator has 90 charges, and survivors repair gens at a speed of 1 charge per second, making gens take 90 seconds to repair. Nice and simple. Regression, however, is much slower, coming in at 0.25 charges per second, 4 times slower than survivors repair them, which means that if survivors got a gen to 99%, it would take 360 seconds or 6 entire minutes for a gen to fully regress. If we account for the instant 5% regression from killers kicking it, then it would be about 5 minutes and 42 seconds base kit. That's really slow. A solo survivor could do 4 gens one after the other in the time it would take one single generator to regress to 0. So knowing that, let's work out how much of a difference Call of Brine has on gen regression. In order to work this out, we do the amount of charges on a gen, which is 90, minus 5% from the initial kick regression, which gives us 85.5 charges to regress. Next, we need to work out the rate at which those charges will regress. Since Brine gives us a 25% increase over the base regression speed of 0.25 charges a second, we work out 25% of 0.25, which is 0.0625, and then add it to the 0.25 to get to 125%. So 0.25 plus 0.0625 gives us 0.3125 charges a second. So base regression speed is 0.25 charges per second, and 125% regression speed is 0.3125 charges a second. Since Call of Brine is only active for 60 seconds, we can simply multiply the charge rate we just worked out by 60 seconds, giving us 18.75, which means that after 60 seconds with Brine active, the gen would have regressed by 18.75 charges. So we remove those 18.75 charges from our starting value of 85.5 charges, which gives us 66.75 charges still remaining after 60 seconds. Once those 60 seconds are up, the gen continues regressing, but at the base speed of 0.25 charges a second. So we take our remaining charges, 66.75, and divide them by our charge rate of 0.25, giving us 267 seconds for the rest of the charges to regress after Brine expires. So we can get our final time by taking those remaining 267 seconds and adding back the initial 60 seconds of Brine we already worked out, giving us 327 seconds. It takes 327 seconds for a gen affected by Call of Brine to regress, compared to 342 seconds base kit, which means that the absolute maximum value that Call of Brine can provide is 15 seconds, in a completely perfect scenario where not a single survivor goes to stop the gen from regressing. Of course, in the highly likely scenario that a survivor does interrupt the gen's regression within a minute, then the time Brine saves would be even lower. The gen kicking meta was pretty damn boring, so I'm not asking for it to come back, but there is no denying that Call of Brine's nerf was way too heavy-handed, because this is basically not a regression perk anymore. It does still have the information aspect of giving you alerts whenever a survivor hits a skill check on a gen affected by Brine, but at that point, it's just a weaker version of surveillance. If the revelation that Brine only saves 15 seconds didn't instantly make you gobsmacked at how truly awful it is, let's take a look at some other regression perks for comparison. Let's compare it to the current grand champion of killer perks at the time of this video, Scourge Hook Pain Resonance. Pain Resonance procs up to 4 times per match upon hooking a survivor on a Scourge Hook for the first time, instantly regressing the gen that's closest to completion by 20% and interrupting any survivors actively working on said gen. It will continue to regress at the normal speed over time. So 20% of a gen gives us 18 charges. Divide those charges by the default regression speed of 0.25 charges per second, and that gives us 72 seconds. That's right, each proc of Pain Res gives you the equivalent of 72 seconds of regression instantly, while activating almost passively since killers would be hooking survivors anyway, and synergizes with Dead Man's Switch due to the interrupt. Compare that to Call of Brine's measly 15 seconds saved, taking place over the course of 60 seconds instead of instantly, requiring manual activation and giving survivors a head start on any ensuing chase, only technically synergizing with other gen kicking perks like Nowhere to Hide, Eruption and Overcharge, as they're all activated via kicking gens. The only level of synergy that Call of Brine could achieve that would be on par with Pain Res and DMS would be if Oppression applied Call of Brine to all affected gens, but it doesn't.
So that don't matter?
Next up, Surge. Every time you down a survivor with a basic attack, all gens within 32 meters of you instantly lose 8% of their progress and regress over time at normal speed. 8% of 90 charges gives us 7.2 charges, divided by the default regression speed of 0.25 charges a second, gives us 28.8 seconds worth of regression instantly, affecting multiple gens at once and proccing on downs, which is also something the killer would be doing anyway. Okay, I've given you enough comparison, let's play a game. What slows down generators more? Call of Brine, a killer perk designed for slowing generators down, or one single failed skill check? If you answered one single failed skill check, then you're correct. One more question, what slows down generators more? 2 instances of Call of Brine, or one single failed skill check? Yes, the answer is still one single failed skill check. Call of Brine gives you 15 seconds worth of extra regression over the course of the 60 seconds that it's active for, whereas a failed skill check regresses gens by 10% or 9 charges, which is 36 seconds worth of regression. So coming back to what I said at the start of the video, gen regression perks range from some of the best perks in the game like Pain Res to some of the worst perks such as Call of Brine, which is less than half as potent as a single failed skill check. But that last point about the missed skill checks probably confused a bunch of you, because if you've ever played Survivor and missed a skill check on a gen, you'd know that missing a skill check does not set you back by 36 seconds. So what gives? Well, when it comes to generators, the value of charges is worth 4 times more to a killer than a survivor. Remember, gens have 90 charges. Each charge takes 1 second for a survivor to repair, but 4 seconds for a killer to regress. And this huge imbalance is what causes this huge disparity between the effectiveness of slowdown. All of those regression numbers I previously listed mean significantly less to survivors' repair speed than it does to killers' regression speed. For instance, take Pain Resonance. Earlier I said that each proc of Pain Res at 20% instant regression is equal to 72 seconds worth of regression over time. But that very same 20% is only worth 18 seconds to survivors' repair time. So going back to Call of Brine again, those 15 seconds worth of regression that I mentioned earlier translate to a measly 3.75 seconds of a survivor's repair time. Yes, less than 4 seconds. So anything that instantly regresses is exponentially more powerful than anything based on regression speed, because the problem lies in the base regression speed itself. Like in Brine's case, a 25% bonus to gen regression speed sounds huge, but that's because as players, we're assuming that the base regression speed is reasonable, but in actuality, a 25% improvement on a value that's so incredibly low gives us no noticeable difference. So what am I saying here? Revert Brine's nerf and bring it back to 200%? No. Call of Brine should be a decent perk at its current value of 25%. And the solution to making that a reality is making base regression speed viable. Base kit, it takes almost 6 minutes for a gen to completely regress, but some matches don't even last that long, especially if you're relying on said base regression speed. Many years ago, when DBD was still new, there was no way of regressing or slowing gens at all, and kicking gens was only added as an afterthought 8 entire months after the game's release, and they were obviously quite tentative with adding such a feature, as they didn't know what effects that ability would have on the game. But since then, regression has had very minimal changes, and I think things need to change. It's time this mechanic gets updated to meet the pace of modern day DBD. Right now, a single survivor can repair a gen 4 times faster than a killer can regress it, and there are 4 survivors, each of whom can be on their own gen. It's time to change regression speed. Whether it's to a third of the repair speed or a half of the repair speed, only testing would show what the right value would be. It also provides the perfect opportunity to nerf several of the other overpicked regression perks like pain resonance that have been core on killer builds since their inception, making killers less reliant on the same old slowdown perks that have been meta for 8 entire years now. Chases are the bread and butter of DBD, and it would be very healthy for the game to see some more chase-oriented perks in the meta, particularly since they benefit basic attack killers far more than anti-loop killers, and basic attack killers need help more than anyone else right now.